What is the shittiest city you've visited only once and completely refused to return? As a Niagara Falls, New York native, I left when I was 25. I should take offense to this, except for the fact that you're spot on point. The entire city is one giant tourist trap, heavily dependent on Canadian shoppers and international tourism for revenue. Once you get past the downtown tourist area, made of the mist, Cave of the Winds, Aquarium, Devil's Hole, and others, the only thing left to do is go across town to the outlet mall and shop. The city is racked with crime, property values are in the pits, and the local government does little to address infrastructure issues. Also, the city administration is currently battling the Seneca Nation, owners of said awkwardly placed casino, with regard to outstanding revenue owed to the city. The city literally smells due to numerous landfills, and there are only two good areas to live in, both of which are on opposite sides of the city, bordering affluent towns. Even those good neighborhoods are troubled by renting college students and outright racists. I will admit that NF has made strides to better itself in the 5 years since I left. The tourist portion of the downtown spine has improved with better restaurants and bars, but the real downtown area, Portage Road, Main Street, is still a shithole. I always like to joke that the biggest bait and switch when visiting NFNY is when you're on the northbound Grand Island Bridge and you can see the skyscrapers on the horizon. To the STID, they believe they are looking at Niagara Falls, New York. Wrong. While they technically are looking at skyscrapers of Niagara Falls, they don't realize those skyscrapers are on the Canadian side. Edit. Specified that Niagara Falls, New York is heavily dependent on Canadian tourism for revenue, not the actual government of Canada itself. I've been to a lot of places. China, Thailand, South Africa, several island nations scattered across the world, most of Europe, Brazil, and a handful of other places. The worst place I've ever experienced is Chennai, India. If there's a worse place on earth, I don't want to see it. I spent 3 weeks there volunteering at a local clinic in one of the poorer parts of town. For reference, I also spent about a week doing volunteer work in the townships around Cape Town. The townships are thought of as some of the most dangerous places on earth, comparable to the favelas in Rio or the worst inner cities in the US. Chennai was not nearly as dangerous as the townships, but somehow, it was much worse. The stink alone was enough for me. The whole city smelled strongly of human excrement and animal stench. It wasn't that people were poor, although they certainly were, it was that nobody gave a shit. The folks in the townships might have wished for a better life, and would have made one for themselves, if it were possible. The poor in Chennai have given up on the very idea of a good life. Many just live, waiting to die. Some of the things I saw included not a single honest taxi or motorbike. All of them tried charging more than the agreed upon price after we arrived, and would make a big scene trying to shame us into paying them. Or they'd take us to their brother's shop, and wouldn't leave, unless we bought something, or threatened to walk without paying him. A human baby floating face down in a puddle of human excrement. A dead human body with goats eating it as people passively sat and watched. Various dead bodies of many species floating in rivers naked. Starving children burning trash for heat outside the wild. Armed gates of Fortune 500 companies, hotels, government buildings. A group of men wielding metal pipes approaching me from the other side of an alleyway, while their friends blocked the entrance we came in. Luckily my traveling companion had a knife and there happened to be a large piece of wood near me, otherwise we would have been robbed for sure, or maybe much worse. A leper clawing at the arm of my traveling companion, and refusing to stop or leave unless we gave her money. I booted her in the chest, and have not regretted it once. Chennai is the worst. Johannesburg, South Africa hands down. Everyone told me to avoid it at all costs, but I thought it would be fine to stay for just a night until my train left for Zimbabwe, so I figured, what the hell. When I got off the bus I was the only white person who exited, and I was immediately bombarded by cab drivers pulling my shirt, almost literally trying to drag me into their cabs. I stood my ground as they tried to remove my backpack from me. A few of them started to fight with each other, and while I don't think any punches were thrown, it started to get violent. I quickly hurried over to another cab driver who was patiently waiting a little further back. When we started to pull out of the bus lot, another cab driver drove his cab into ours, blocking the exit. Definitely hit us hard enough for some exterior damage to the bumper but nothing more. My driver just pushed the other car out of the way with his by putting the pedal to the floor. This all happened in about a span of 2 minutes from the time I stepped out of the bus. My heart was racing, and I had heard horror stories about how bad the witch doctor stuff around the area is, and at the time it really felt like I was going to be kidnapped and cut up into healing medicine. I was even considering trying to get out of the moving cab because I was afraid he wasn't taking me where I asked. Once I got to my hostel, there were armed guards surrounding the perimeter, which is pretty typical in heavily populated areas of South Africa, but there were definitely more at this hostel than others I had been to. The place was a total shithole. Literally rats in the fridge. I had a little food to cook, but I couldn't bring myself to cook in that kitchen. After taking a few hours to calm down and collect myself, I convinced myself that I was overreacting and that it's all fine. I got the courage to walk the 1.5 miles to the nearest grocery store. The guy at the desk said it would be fine. It was not. I was such an idiot. On my walk I saw a house burning, and it seemed like no one even noticed. People were just walking by it like it wasn't even happening. I felt like I was in a post-apocalyptic movie. I got harassed by 6 or 7 14-year-old school kids dressed in uniform. They went out of their way to follow me and shout the N-word at me. Some of the kids were bigger than I was, so I just looked straight and kept walking. They lingered behind me for a few hundred feet or so and were thrusting themselves at me with their fists up and laughing. It was really hard to not turn around, but I could tell they were looking for a reaction out of me and wanting an excuse for it to get physical. It was terrible. I was expecting to get a fist to the back of the head, but they eventually lost interest one at a time. Almost pissed myself. After I made it to the grocery store, I got a cab back to the hostel because I was sure the walk back would be worse as it was starting to get dark. I set up my tent in the tent area, which is right next to the 4-foot tall wall. The wall was covered in glass, but it was kind of pointless because anyone could relatively effortless jump it. Around midnight I was Skyping with one of my friend back home when a gunfight started outside the wall. The shots were so loud it felt like it was happening just on the other side of the wall. I'm sure it wasn't that close, but it sure felt like I was in the middle of it. Panicked, I ran into the kitchen to find one of the staff cleaning, and I'll never forget our conversation. Me, did you hear those gunshots? Him, yeah. Me, should I be concerned? Him, were they shooting at you? Me, no. Him, then go back to bed. I don't think I slept very much that night. I spent less than 24 hours there in total, and that was way too much for me. Never again. Edit. I'm aware that Joburg has nice areas. I also admit I made mistakes, and my own stupidity is what got me into these situations. I loved South Africa, but I don't see what's so hard to believe about this. I've heard much worse stories which mostly involve death. Nalma Bay, Egypt. If it constitutes as a city, I've never had such a disconcerting experience in my entire life. I was solicited and aggressively accosted by several men as soon as I disembarked from the taxi. They converge on unsuspecting tourists and incarcerate you inside their shops until something is purchased for an exorbitant amount. I was walking along, and my head was abruptly swathed into a cocoon of fabric. So I conducted myself as any rational adult would and panicked with a scream and vigorously trying to remove the obscuring fabric, whilst one shop owner bemusedly explained he was trying to sell me a type of hijab. I'm tolerant of their culture, but it's completely unpalatable to just attack someone like that. My indignation was not well received, and I didn't need to be fluent in Arabic to discern the pejorative term. The city itself is a deception from the picturesque vibrancy of a shopping center and prospering market stalls. Do not be deceived by the tales of affable shop owners who will lavish you with praise, who are obsequious because they are so impressed with foreigners. No, the place is a crumbling facade of desperate poverty that will alleviate itself through any means necessary. Do not go there as a woman or group of women. Always have a male present. This makes them more circumspect and unlikely to approach. I'd like to thank the American family which inadvertently saved me from being restrained by one shop owner when they were calling for their daughter who was behind me, and I acted as if I was her. The father gave me a dubious look, but his wife took it in stride. Once I visited Aktor, Kazakhstan. Don't even think about visiting the city in the June/July. It's a hellhole, way too hot and zero wind. I live in nearby city. It's hot as fuck here too, but at least there is some wind. You will feel like you are being cooked. Also all the shops close at around 8 evening, which was faking shit considering I just had a paintball game, which is also so faking far away, and while I felt drained there were no shops open nearby to buy some water, had to wait around 30 minutes to finally get a taxi and eat in some overpriced restaurant. Also the taxi drivers are the worst, since I was in a big group. We divided in two and ordered a taxi and the prices were so big it was actually ridiculous. Around 1.5k tench per taxi if you are not going to be near the city center, and considering I've never had a taxi driver ask me more than 600 TG, I felt really angry. And moreover, both taxi drivers were old people who couldn't keep their mouth shut. Ours was constantly telling insults about his own son, and that he should have never reproduced and telling us, young kids, about such and shit. The only reason I wanted to go there was to see the sea, and holy crap the facilities around there were actually non-existent. And the water was cold and uncomfortable to swim in, whilst the sand at the beach was spitting fire. Also everything is overpriced. Also be careful at the beach, you might find some glass in the sand. And at the railway station someone stole my phone, which never happened to me before despite being at a lot of stations. Security is non-existent, and way more scams that I was used to see. Never coming back to Actor, way too much bad things happened to me. Also a bit off topic, but I faking hate people working at the train service. Idiots who know jack shit about their job. Gary, Indiana. I was driving cross country with my father, who is a musician. It was getting towards night and my dad was like, "Hey, Gary, Indiana. Like the song. We have to stay there tonight." Yeah, no. We pulled off the interstate and were immediately in what looked like a good area to be robbed and shot. Then we got lost trying to find the interstate again. My dad finally stopped at a gas station for directions, and I, an 18-year-old girl at the time, had a horrifying panic attack because I couldn't decide where I was more likely to die, by leaving the safety of the car, but sticking by my dad, or by locking the car doors and hiding in the backseat by myself. Point for the record, while I'm a suburban white girl, I was raised a stone's throw from New York City and was, at the time, driving my mom through some really bad neighborhoods too, 3x/month, to go to a certain hospital for transplant follow-up. Like, gunshots a few streets over every now and again, especially if the appointments lasted towards dark. And I was fine. Maybe it was just that section of Gary, but I will never ever go there again. My dad, the most unflappable hippie you've ever met, was scared. This man walked right up to a schizophrenic man wielding a gun and talked him down. Nothing shakes my father, but that place did. Point never again. Personally I've been to Gary, Indiana twice and East St. Louis once. East St. Louis looks like something straight up out of Mad Maximum. It is post-apocalyptic with people burning trash and staring at you with 2x4s in hand and prostitutes missing chunks of hair waving at you in the middle of the day. Also saw my first real life tumbleweed there. Ended up there by accident trying to get to Pop's music venue, and when my two friends and myself did, two cops pulled up to us and told us, "What the hell are you doing here? Go down this street and take a right and get on the highway now." Gary, Indiana is like some straight up Tales from the Hood nightmare that is covered in filth, liquor stores/pawn shops/and strip joints. You know you're in Gary the second you cross county line, because it literally smells like a toilet made out of dead bodies. Went there once not knowing how bad it was to buy some weed. Bad choice, but that's a whole nother story. The other time was an accident coming home and took a wrong turn. Both cities are highly dangerous and are in severe levels of urban decay, but equal in feelings of your death is imminent if you stay more than 30 minutes. However, I will say St. Louis is my hometown. I now live outside Chicago, and I much prefer St. Louis over Chicago in many aspects. I always get sad when I see all the hate St. Louis gets on Reddit, and I feel it's unwarranted as a whole. The people are amazingly friendly, it's cheap to do anything, or even free for that matter, and the food is incredible. Also better weather than up here in Chicago. I'll take heat over months of obnoxious and depressing snowstorms any day. Casablanca, Morocco. Yes, there are some pretty areas and oh my god, the movie Casablanca, but the city is overwhelmingly the opposite of that. We stayed in a 5-star hotel and were told not to walk around at night. The hotel also told us to never hail a taxi on our own, always have the hotel do it for us, because they only use the reputable companies and we would not be safe if we did it on our own. Some females in our group were yelled at on the street, followed and called hoes, because they did not have their heads covered. The country's heritage is part Muslim and part French, and it is by no means required to wear a head covering. We did extensive research on that before we went, and were also far from sticking out as women without head coverings. I would say it was about 60/40. Split between women who wore head coverings versus those who did not. We were harassed on the streets, and overall the city was just dirty, smelly, unwelcoming, and the overwhelming poverty and things that come with that, panhandlers, homeless, aggressive hustlers for everything, just made us really uncomfortable. I've traveled to many different countries, some of them solo as a mid-20s female, and have never felt as uncomfortable and unsafe as I did in Casablanca. I also personally didn't enjoy Paris, but nowhere near on the scale as Casablanca. I actually want to give Paris another shot, now that it's been 10+ years since I've been there. Philadelphia. Never again. Contrast. I'm from Los Angeles. LA is a great city, and yes, we have some rough areas. Really rough areas. However, much of the crime/violence is not random, even in the worst LA neighborhoods. Generally speaking, if you go out walking late at night in the worst neighborhood in Inglewood, you're generally not going to be harassed or jacked if you're basically minding your own business. It's definitely not a great idea to do so, but odds are, you're not going to be faked with. During the daytime, you'll be sketched out, for sure, but okay overall. By contrast, I arrive in Philadelphia by train from New York City to visit a friend for the day. Literally, the moment I get off the train, I get one pickpocketing attempt. Alright, that was sketchy, but the stuff in my pocket is still there. I'm fine, and I keep moving to catch a cab to meet my friend. It takes me waving at 10 different cabs to catch a cab. This is pre-Uber days, folks. Totally annoyed, but okay, whatever. Hop in the cab. 2 blocks later, my cab driver gets into a car accident and proceeds to freak the fuck out. Hops out of the cab and grabs a metal baseball bat from the trunk and starts threatening the driver of the car that he hit. My cabbie was at fault, by the way. I'm not badly hurt, but I write down his info before I leave the car and grab my digital camera to snap pictures of the plate and scene before I leave. The cabbie sees me taking a picture of his plates, then turns on me, running after me with a metal baseball bat. In this moment, I thanked my genetic makeup for the gift of endurance and ran as fast and as long as I could toward a train station. This is all during midday, like between 11 AM and 1 PM. So, I decide at this point to meet my friend at her workplace early to let her know I'm fully intact and go shopping while I wait for her. So, we meet, and she points out a more lush place nearby where I can hang out the 45 minutes until she's free from work. While grabbing pizza, I see a guy get shot in the arm, who kept driving his car, by the way. Like, the most casual street shooting I have ever seen. And nobody bat an eye. Visiting the bathroom, I walked in on an argument between a prostitute and her customer, and decided I didn't need to pee. Actually, after this, I decided I'm never visiting Philly again. This was just the highlights reel of my 7-8 hours visiting. My friend assured me that we were in the nice part of town. There were some really beautiful spots, some kind people I met, and some very cool historical places, but overall I left knowing I was not a fan of Philadelphia at all. Harrisonburg, Virginia. I've told this story here before, but I'll tell it again, because Harrisonburg. A couple friends and I were making our way from Ocean City, New Jersey to New Orleans, Louisiana for the national conference of our fraternity. It was a long drive, but cheaper than plane tickets, and one of my friends had some family in the Carolinas that would feed and house us for a night on the way down. After our first stop, we switched drivers and I hopped in to take us through VAB. We were just coming into the city on a highway that had a raised green median with green hills on either side. We were in the left lane and everything was going swimmingly, even though traffic in the right lane was moving quite a bit quicker with heavy truck traffic. We were behind a utility truck, pickup truck with all the extra fixings and compartments and ladders and such, and were following a reasonable distance, but not following the 1 car length for every 10 miles per hour rule. Traffic was too heavy. All of a sudden, the truck in front of us swerves off the road into the hill on the left. Traffic in front of him was at a complete stop. I was traveling at about 45 miles per hour at this point, and had a little over a second until I hit something in my friend's Chevy Suburban. I drove a very tiny car at the time. I pulled my car right, but there was a tractor trailer coming fast, so I cut back left and clipped the car in front of us, and then we hit the embankment hard. It was a hill, and came to a stop in the grass. The couple in the car we hit were very nice and understanding. We had only dented their quarter panel, but I had royally faked up the front of this Suburban. The guy in the truck drives around us and waves as we go by. Fuck Harrisonburg #1. This was my first car crash, so I was kinda shaken up, but we called AAA and the cops, and it was all good. Point the cop pulls up and is an asshole right away. Made us call him sir, had to line up against the car. Fuck Harrisonburg #2. We were 4 college guys in fraternity letters with a beat up car in a state we didn't belong in, so things were stacked against us to say the least. He tells us he's calling his tow guy, even though we tell him that AAA is on its way. You'll have to go with whoever gets here first. He says couple we hit goes on their way and we see the AAA guy coming down the highway, but he's stuck in traffic because things are still moving slowly because of the accident. Then we see a tow truck coming the wrong way down the exit and this cop parts traffic and lets him come down and back up to us. AAA guy is so close I can see his face, but the cop makes us go with his guy. Didn't have a lot of cash, so losing the free tow sucked. We get the Suburban on the flatbed, and then the cop is like, okay, get in. The truck didn't have any wheels roped or anything. It was literally just held on the bed by friction in the tow chain. I pipe up and say that I'm pretty sure it's illegal to ride in like that, but the cop tells us it's either ride in the Suburban or come with him back to the station and wait there. We knew we didn't have a lot of power in this situation, so we hop on. Fuck Harrisonburg #3. We drop the car off at a shop. It's Sunday so everything is closed, and get a hotel room. After ordering some Zap, we get a call from my friend's mom, the one who owns the truck. Apparently, the insurance company called her and said the tow truck guy's illegally operating and is demanding some crazy amount of money, otherwise he's taking the car for scrap. I don't know if we messed up and where we dropped it off, or didn't sign something, but something got faked up. Apparently this guy hadn't renewed whatever tow license you need a couple months ago, and had just liquidated all his assets as he prepared to move across the country, with no set future address. The mom worked with the insurance company and some legal letterhead from the office she worked in, and let us know at 11 PM that at 7 tomorrow morning, we would have to meet this guy in the parking lot and pay him $200 cash. Fuck Harrisonburg #4. This is already one of the craziest things that had ever happened to us, so it felt like a movie and we were amped up because things were so shitty. We ended up talking to the 2 guys at the front desk who were our age and told them about the possible beatdown that would happen tomorrow morning. Morning comes and we are ready to kill this guy because we are tired and pissed, and there was a bow and arrow / a couple baseball bats in the back if anything was missing from the truck. He doesn't say anything and backs the truck into a parking spot. We check everything out and hand him cash and tell him to fuck off. Big fuck Harrisonburg. Anticlimactic, I know. We head back inside and the front desk guys give us some great recommendations. The shop we go to is fair and lets us store the truck there until we come back home a week later for free. The rental car place waives all extra fees that insurance doesn't cover and gets us a great rental for the week for like $24. We have a great time in New Orleans and loved the city despite the heat. I did get a pretty bad sore throat however, and I'm positive that it happened because of the shitty Harrisonburg air I had to breath for a day. TLDR fuck Harrisonburg, Virginia. Phoenix, Arizona. I lived there with my family for a little over a year, and it was fucking miserable. The city is massive, and there's more bad areas than good. I don't give a fuck if it's a dry heat. 120 degrees is still 120 motherfucking degrees. Want to know what that is in Celsius? 49 fucking degrees. Rampant racism. Whites, Hispanics/Latinos, and Asians all hating on one another couldn't drink the tap water. Not only did it taste like salty pool water, there'd be advisories warning people to not to drink it, and in worst case scenarios, to not bathe in it. There was a water store down the street from us, and we'd refill out 5-gallon water jugs each week, so we could have safe water despite having a pool. You couldn't safely swim during the height of summer, because the water would be too warm. Cannot tell you how many times we'd hear on the news of someone having heat stroke in the pool, and sometimes even drowning. You live in the desert. Huzzah. It's survival of the fittest, and just about everything wants to fucking kill you. If it can't do that, it will hurt you very much. Just about everything bites, stings, and is poisonous or venomous in some way. And scorpions. Scorpions fucking everywhere. Aside from the heat, the weather was usually at some extreme. Torrential downpours, haboobs, flash floods, frosts, etc. Tijuana, Mexico. I was on vacation in San Diego, and at that time I had never left the US, so I took the train to the border crossing in San Isidro. Getting into Tijuana is no problem. You walk in by following the crowd, no checkpoints, nothing. In 2008, you can walk into Mexico carrying a hooker and a machine gun, probably. Then, you are hit by the kids selling chiclets. Soon after that, once you get off the pedestrian bridge, you get hit by the drug dealers. These are not your regular drug dealers who either signal you or ask quietly you want weed, blow, and walk away quickly if you don't respond. No, sir, these are persistent motherfuckers. They don't care if you say no. They will follow you for longer than you are comfortable with, repeating over and over the things they have for sale. Oh, you know what drugs? How about guns, girls, what you want? At this point, when the drug dealers finally stop harassing me, I stop to ask 2 police officers if I'm heading in the correct direction to reach Avenue del Revolution. They then suspiciously question me, asking me the same questions over and over. Why are you here? What are you trying to do here? Buy guns, drugs, girls? Why are you here? They simply do not accept my explanation that I'm on vacation in San Diego and have never been to Mexico. Keep in mind, it's like 11 AM, broad daylight. Then they tell me to empty my pockets, giving everyone in the area a good look at how much cash I have on me, my wallet, my iPod. Thanks guys. After that I'm told to pick up my things and go away, with no directions to Avenue del Revolution. I find Avenue del Revolution, and begin to walk down the main drag, looking at the shops and whatnot. Here is where you are aggressively harassed, and sometimes literally grabbed and pulled into people's shops selling useless shit and crappy souvenirs. I make one pass, for a few blocks, and I've heard it. I'm sick of this shit. I'm going back to San Diego. If the line into Mexico is quick and easy, the line out of Mexico, back into the US, is not. I'm standing in a long line, moving slowly. I see people being pulled out of line by border officers. People screaming, crying, people passing money to border officers. I want to be back in the US. I finally get to the gate, answer their questions, and I'm back on US soil in San Isidro. I very nearly fall to my knees and kiss the ground. Tijuana, and I'm never going back. I'm going cheat here, because I haven't really been to many places, but South Carolina outside of my state. But my city, Baltimore. Baltimore is such a fucking dump, lacking in personality or anything really interesting to do. It's now being bought up by everyone around with money to make it an even more boring and personality lacking place in TJE future. For example, the CEO of Under Armour got the money up to build a new neighborhood in a place here named Port Covington that was nothing but warehouses, factory, ports, and surrounding neighborhoods of poor/working class whites. No one here really cares about shit, and that makes it easy for the trashes politicians who run this city to get over and do what they want. The Freddie Gray riots happened, and what did they do? Used it as an extra push to start gentrifying and raising buildings, leaving nothing but dirt fields. There's a fake sense of togetherness and pride here that's usually just talk, because most people are out for themselves. Really don't trust anyone in Baltimore. Bunch of flaky, unreliable people who think they're clever, but you have to be really stupid to get duped by these faking idiots. Not to mention the streets are shit and everyone here drives like they can phase right through every faking thing. And it seems like we get the shittiest, most moronic people from other cities/states. I call it the city where everyone else sends their shit east. Like people who come from some place like New York and are surprised at how cheap the cost of living here is. Yes, because who the fuck wants to live in Baltimore? It's so dull and bureaucratic, so it attracts the most soulless, dull, spineless, boring motherfuckers you can find. Everyone acts paranoid and thinks they know everything, so offish and have inferiority complexes, because no one can't spare the chance to show you up and show you how smart they are in this dump. And everyone tends to believe the only good time you can have is going to some shitty mall or acting like big shit because they can afford to go sit in some mid-range trash food chain like Fridays. I like Detroit because at least Detroit knows it's shit. Baltimore has a ego for nothing. Same with a lot of the people. Take the shittiest aspects of New York and that's Baltimore. Think of Baltimore as that cocky kid you knew who couldn't do shit and had no skills. I'm black and 27. I don't get involved with anything that has to do with improving this city because those things are usually organized by the shittiest people you can find. Power hunger narcissists who aren't really about shit. Think about Baltimore as if someone took the shittiest trailer park and backwater town and blew it up to the size of a small city. That's Baltimore. The blind leading the blind. Idiots who should have nothing to do with positions of power taking up positions of power because they are the only ones ambitious and narcissistic enough to take up the positions. There's a few good neighborhoods, and I mean that a few. You have people speaking on the gentrification, but no one's out protesting. You try to tell people about this shit and they give you a dullard's look. I plan on leaving in some years, so I couldn't give a fuck less really. It's hard to care about this place. Nassau, Bahamas. Only spent a day there. The place is faking filthy. The local merchants were very aggressive and quite rude. I've never seen such a startling divide between rich and poor. On one side of the city there are luxurious vacation homes owned by celebrities such as Oprah. Not even a 5-minute drive away is literally the worst ghetto I have ever seen. Literally one communal water tap for every few hundred people. No electricity at all. I went on a driving tour with a few people, and while everyone went off to take photos I stayed back and chatted with our guide while we ate lunch. I picked his brain about as to why there was such a class division, and he told me, deadpan, that it was all to do with corruption and drugs. The drug gangs pretty much own the whole island, police and politicians included. All of the people with money are protected, and the rest are pretty much forgotten about. If you aren't lucky enough to land a job in a casino resort, you're pretty much faked, unless you sell drugs, and even then you'll most likely be murdered. The place is beautiful, but I can't express how fucking depressing it was being there and seeing how life actually is for the people living there. It could be so much better, but I just can't see it changing. Duly noted. I visited there about 4 years ago. I have no idea what it's like now. Lubeck, Maine. It's mostly personal reason as I felt betrayed by a long-term girlfriend who turned our trip into a literal fuckfest, leaving me behind to hang with her family while she gallivanted from guy go to guy. We were separated at the time, but she invited me along so we could work things out and get back together. One night she asked me to sleep in the living room instead of her bedroom. When I went to grab my shoes I saw she was in bed with her dad's girlfriend's son. I flipped and called her a slut, and her father saw me storming out. He also heard me as we were all staying in a trailer. I ended up spending the remainder of the trip at her grandma's as her father made it clear I wasn't welcome in his trailer mansion, and hanging with her cousins and brother who felt terrible that she did what she did to me. We were silent for the 8 hours back to Rhode Island, only for her to attempt to turn back into my girlfriend when we hit the Rhode Island border. Her brother laughed and said, "Are you kidding me, Kate? After what you did to him, he should never talk to you again." This was the one and only time I wish summer vacation would end and school would begin. This girl put me through hell that summer, and it started when I had a feeling she was cheating on me. She ignored all my calls that day. Texting was just starting, and most PPL didn't have a text plan. She was supposed to come over that night and she never did. I was a wreck and my father knocked me out with as an ex. When I woke up I still had not heard from her, so I decided to walk to her house 6 miles away. When I got there her aunt and Gram who lived next door wouldn't let me over there. They saw her come home the night before and assumed I was the guy in the car. When I showed up the next morning they realized I was not the guy she came home with, and if I walked in there I would find a guy in her bed. And a fight would have ensued as I beat his naked as course he knew she had a boyfriend. I broke up with her that day, and it led to a summer of her trying to make it right, culminating in that trip to that god-awful town of Lübeck. If it weren't for her brother and cousin I would have probably walked home or something stupid. This girl wrecked me and put me through hell, but she was my first love, and I lost my virginity to her, so I was in deep. In the end she got what was coming to her. I won't detail what happened to her, but trust it was bad and her life proceeded to downward spiral. She reached out to me about 3 years ago and profusely apologized to me, explaining how bad she was and how good I was to her and that I was the best thing that ever happened to her. I thought, wow, she must really have it bad if she thinks I have my life together and was good for her. Wow, I got off on a tangent there, sorry Mayo, and although it's a shitty hick town with nothing to do except visit the local liger and pick blueberries, every resident would religiously watch Buffy and Charmed every morning as they were all unemployed and just drunks. I will never ever go back to this hellhole unless it is to buy all the blueberry farms out from under them. Yes, I'm salty. I've been through Waco, Texas many times, but only spent the night there once. It was a motel near the intersections of 2 interstates. One-way service road nightmare from hell. I checked the map, realized I was in a food desert. To get near anything, we have to drive the wrong way to get to the other interstate and then go the wrong way again until we could get flipped to get back to the first interstate, basically making a few blocks an hour ordeal at least, so I opted to walk. Scoped out a pizza place that I really wanted to try. Shortest route was through some fields, down the railroad tracks, zigzagged around through the industrial section, counting different types of trash as I walked. I opted for a specialty pizza and was pleased with my purchase. However, I noticed there were 50 times as many hypodermic needles than work gloves earplugs on the roadside. If you really want to get the feel for a town, take a walk. I've walked through literally hundreds of towns and never seen so many needles discarded so carelessly on the roadside. I had to dodge them like they were snakes. It must really suck to grow up there. I will never be back to a town that makes it so difficult to move around, much less has so many people on drugs. Maybe the planners were on drugs too. Ruffle. Varanasi Point. I say this for 2 reasons, both literally relating to sheet point. First, because I sheet more in the 5 days I was there than any man should in any 5-day stretch. I've been to the third world plenty of times in my life. I have had the runs. The normal runs you get most places you get for a day or 2, and then you get over them. This was water out of my ass for a week straight. I don't want to go into the medical details of what it was. It was the worst I've ever experienced. I didn't have hemorrhoids before that trip. I did after second. The streets were the sheet east. Cow pup, dog pup, human pup. I got the sense, while I was there, that they don't really have sewers, or at least most people and creatures don't really know they exist. Most of the toilets are those holes in the floor of the bathroom. A lot of the world is like that actually. You can imagine how that turns out. But this means many people there also don't really know how to use Western toilets. So when you did manage to find one, it was always in the worst possible condition. The first person to use it didn't flush, nor the second, nor the third. You can tell that someone might have tried flushing, but it just clogged up, and then every person after either passed on using the toilet, or didn't have a choice. Then of course nobody wants to clean it, so there it sits, a tower of sheet on the one Western toilet in the southern half of Varanasi. I was one of the ones who didn't have a choice point, so I'm never going back. Point edit. A third reason's also related to sheet exists. The sewers that do exist all run out into the river, where people swim among the half-burned corpses, industrial runoff, and the several dozen sheets I took on Monday because I ate something with parasites in it. The city is sheety. Magaluf pointed to the English and Dutch, what Bali is the Aussies, and to Joanna is to the Yanks, I guess. It's a completely destabilized social experiment that I'm amazed hasn't been subject to any terrorist attacks given its proximity to some Islamic countries. The reason it exists must be payback for some atrocity the Spanish committed on the family's advocation. Their point, the amount of sex and drugs and violence that goes on there is legendary. In Magaluf, basically, you go there as a rite of passage. You're a mad lad with your mad lad butts looking to get shagged. And trust me, you will get shagged. You'll get shagged good and proper. But you'll also see other people getting shagged. And you'll see the result of that shag spewed over the pavement, mixed in with all the vomit and burnt pasty. Englishmen point, your hotel will be like the buildings you see in pictures of liberated Iraqi villages. The swimming pool will be full of condoms and piss. The girls will be from the north of England and will have a bigger, tougher, and have a bigger dick than you do. The food is less to die for than fighting for a right to fuck an orangutan. And everyone is either super horrible to one another, or they want to shag you and give you gonorrhea. Point, the locals hate everyone there. And it's one of the few places where their roads are 80% liquid. Point, and the amazing thing is that there are lots of places that are like this, but none have the persistence of Magaluf. It's like this every day. My mother went there, and it was like this. And I've gone there, and it was like this. On or off seasons, it's like this. New York City. In addition to the horrendous company of my very Winnie and unbathed now ex and his cliquey smarmy friends, the city was overwhelmingly loud, busy, and smelly. I grew up in the Willamette Valley. Never come here if you have grass allergies. It's literally the worst on the planet for those. And my father was so quiet he didn't even listen to music in the car. So the noise and bustle of the city were a real shock. Point, plus, the guy I was seeing at the time did stupid stuff. Taunted some homeless people with a huge crate of White Castle burgers, which were for some kind of challenge, so that they chased us for several blocks and tried to cut my hair off. He left the burgers to rot in our hotel room in Jersey, but that isn't New York City's fault. B insisted on walking on an ankle he had obviously twisted going down some stairs to a ferry that would take us around the Statue of Liberty until it had swelled up the size of a softball and turned purple, which resulted in him whining and sending me for ice instead of letting me look at the statue. Plus, him forcing me to push his ass around the Museum of Natural History in a wheelchair, while also carrying our bags and all our collective shopping for the day, which meant I missed most of it, because he was pretending also to be mostly blind, and he didn't look to see when anything closed, so everywhere we went we were running through to see as much as we could as fast as possible. So the things I remember most from the trip are being chased by bums and the smell of piss in the subway. Bucharest, Romania. Point, was backpacking with my grandparents when I was 15, and we got a taxi from the border to Bucharest. As we got further into the city everything looked dirty and unloved, and we felt on edge in a way we'd never felt on the trip. My nan is a seasoned traveler who has backpacked in some dicey places in her life, and she said she didn't feel safe. Anyway, we made our way to the main station to decide where to go to get out of the city. We sat in the station's McDonald's waiting for the ticket office to open. We noticed a young girl begging. She was younger than me at the time. She was making her way round Max's begging and picking up hot chips off the floor. We kept watching out of morbid curiosity as she got to two young lads aged about 17. They started chatting to her and pointing at the menu board. Next thing, she's on her knees sucking one of them off as the other one goes off to the counter and comes back with a Big Mac. Then she moved on to the second guy. Me and my grandparents sat there in disbelief. My granddad got really embarrassed and told me no to look. After the girl had finished they gave her the Big Mac and told her to get lost. My granddad went to tell the counter staff and they just shrugged like it happened a lot. When the ticket office opened we noped the fuck out of there on the first train to Hungary. TLDR, with my grandparents. 15-year-old me witnessed a girl give two guys blowjobs for a Big Mac in the middle of McDonald's at Bucharest station. Memphis. I was there on business and was all excited to check out Bale Street because, hey, public drinking. It is the middle of the summer, so on the drive in from the airport, I see absolutely no one on the street except for a few homeless looking, at least, people. The whole city just looks deserted. We installed things all over the city, so I was able to see a lot of the locations over the next 2 days, and it was all the same. After work, we decided to walk to Bay L from my hotel, which is only a handful of blocks, grabbed a big beer, because I thought it would be something like Bourbon Street and we were going to be strolling for a while. And then got to the end of the block, and realized I was already halfway done. With all the police presence around it, it just seemed so themelandish, not like Bourbon Street, that feels a bit more authentic. The place we ate on Bourbon Street wasn't very good, and we went to a good BBQ the second night, which was the only thing worth talking about. I looked for a place with some good music, but, of course, it all has to be the same blues playing in almost every place. Definitely just touristy. The whole was basically overrun by frat boys and bachelorette parties. I stayed out for a while and watched some street acts. And this guy just starts chatting me up, which I'm fine with. Eventually he hits me up for some money. I guess the law there is no panhandling. However, you can ask your friends for money, so they have to befriend you first. Fuck that. I want my beggars to just straight up ask for money, so I can tell them yes/no quickly. Point on the way back, those 3 blocks were almost completely dark, and I was propositioned by a hooker that I considered paying to just go away. Then a guy popped out of an alleyway as I walked by and started walking behind me. I was a bit nervous, but luckily, I was right near the hotel. When I got in, I thought I was just being paranoid, but I looked back over my shoulder and the guy was walking past the hotel looking straight in at me. He then stops and just turns around and goes back where we came from. I felt a little less paranoid and more justified at that point. We went to Graceland, which was meh, but the area around it was so depressing. Same thing, I visited a friend who lived in the suburbs, and on the drive out there, it was exactly I think about when I think of suburban hell. Sprawling, boring, nearly identical houses in fake little communities. When my wife was looking for programs for her fellowship, when she asked me if there was any place off limits, my only restriction was not Memphis. Harrisonburg, Virginia. He was on a motorcycle trip to DC from Birmingham, Alabama. I spent my first night at a campsite in Cherokee, North Carolina, just off the Blue Ridge Parkway. The second night, I stayed at a hotel in good ol' Harrisonburg. Exhausted, I disrobed and called Domino's for some delivery Sammys and wings. I answer the door for my pizza, and there's the pizza guy, with a big slobbering pit bull stumbling past him down the sidewalk in front of the rooms. Now, I had already noticed a rough group of guys, 4 guys in an old, beat-up work truck that had been loud and were smoking and drinking furiously just 2 doors down. Fortunately, they had gone out to a bar or to pick up some meth or whatever. Well, they had left their dog locked up, and he had completely ransacked their room, eating all of his food, and had chewed up several prescription bottles, and from the amount of drool I assume he ate the contents. I love pibbles. I have 2 myself, and I understand dogs' body language pretty well, having worked at a vet for several years. The dog started wandering off towards the highway, so I tried to lure him back with a drumstick. Not interested, and did not like me holding his collar, so I tried luring him into his room. No luck. Eventually I get freezing cold, and lose the dog and give up. Like 30 minutes, cue the dipsheets. They get back to their room, and instead of coming together in an effort to find their dog, they begin beating the shit out of each other about who left the pills out, etc. I'm standing peeking through my curtains, because I'm keeping my eye on my motorcycle in the melee, and because I'm watching this one dude just take punches to the face, like they were nothing. I mean, his head would go back to where it was and completely expressionless, whilst talking shit. This seemed to anger the gentleman throwing the punches, so he proceeds to pull a knife and hold it to the guy's throat. Meanwhile, he's telling him, do it, Bussy Beach, etc. Anyways, cops showed up, and I went outside to talk to the guy who was taking punches to the face. While the cops were still there, the nifty punch faces in the back of a police cruiser in handcuffs. Obviously. The guy said, yeah man, he just didn't like how I was eating those punches like cake, so, never staying there again. I'm a little late to the thread, but, Memphis, Tennessee is the absolute worst shithole of a city I have ever visited, and I live in Florida. I went there with my college roommate in 2010 for the UCF Georgia Liberty Bowl and we stayed down in the nice part of the downtown area on Bale Street. Well, the game was on New Year's Eve, so after the UCF stunning victory we all went out. I had met up with a large group of friends from college, and we went to a few places for the evening. Of the 3 places we had went to, each had to cut music and turn on the lights, so police could enter and break up fistfights. The actual police presence was insane. I have gone out to downtown Orlando for holidays like Nye and Halloween and there is no comparison. Police in full riot gear with MP5/R15 type rifles were everywhere. The general trashy smell and upkeep of the nice downtown area was alarming, but the absolute worst part of the evening is when around 3 AM or so just the most skeezy, sketchy looking people started to just prowl looking for anyone who was walking alone, and these people would follow them until they joined a larger group or got close to a police officer, at which time they would scatter. The only redemptive quality the city had was open container on the street 0/10ths would not visit again. Ever. In France, I'm French. The shittiest cities I visited were Lescure d'Albigés. This little city has 0% charm. Streets are empty and ugly, with no plan, no gardens or trees. There's no city center. The only monument is some weird brick tower. There's a river, but you can't access it, as it's 20 meters at the bottom of a narrow valley. River waters look polluted and green. The bridge crossing it links this miserable city to an 1890 industrial zone suspended on the cliff stool. Don't go there. Sounds like a charming little rural city in the middle of nowhere. Well, they just built skyscrapers in the middle of this nowhere. There's only one commercial street that's always over encumbered in a pure anarchy. The river is impossible to reach, nestled at the bottom of a very large canal made of rough stones. A mile downstream of the city, the river becomes large and could have been correct, but they just use the islands in the middle of it to put supermarkets. Villefranche de Rouergue, they just managed to make a medieval city with Manhattan-styled squared urban plan. What's working with skyscrapers doesn't work at all for a 12,000 people rural town with zero transportation system. The result is a labyrinthic city center, where you can't even circulate or find anything. And as a bonus, point 4, Paris. This monstrous 700 billions your piece of concrete has absolutely nothing to see with France. That's not France at all. We should rename it Mega City 1 like in Judge Dredd. Labyrinthic, dirty, overpopulated, gigantic, where the luxury mixes with absolute poverty. It's just like a cancer that grows day after day, who will eventually cover the rest of the country one day. It's just like Disney World, a surrealistic city made for the tourists and the richest ones, but cleaned, secured, and haunted by a legion of paws you don't even know the name, and you don't even have to see. Paris is not France, that's another world, even if Paris claims it is France, of course. Sometimes I regret nobody ever removed this absurdity from my country. Just raise this to the ground and let the nature allow us to forget this has ever existed. Austin, Nevada. Sorry this is long, but I have a lot to say about our experience. Stopped in with some friends on a road trip for lunch. This was August 2016. There were vagrant/dead/strip trucks/buses/cars all over the place down the main strip. This was a Saturday midday and nearly every place of business was closed or abandoned. There was really only one place to eat. It looked like a western/wagon themed bar/cafe. As soon as we got out of the car I already decided I wasn't going to eat anything here. It was just not worth the experience. The 3 others were hungry, so we went in. There was Trump propaganda, posters, flags, hats, etc. All prominently displayed in the front window for viewing/sale. A rotating book display held various issues of a particular publication for sale, all by the same author, all in the style of 100 Reasons Why Men Are Better Than Women and 50 Ways to Avoid Using the Internet. They were all intended to be humor from the good old days and were racist, bigoted, and ignorant to a cringe-worthy degree. There were also viewing copies on every table. The whole restaurant was very unorganized and hardly clean. Random sheet all over the walls, and it was hard to tell what was behind the counter and what was a seating area. Tables were just kinda scattered around a large room and there were piles of beans and boxes and random non-restaurant things on every non-table surface. Only one employee appeared to be working, and 2 motorcyclists were seated, finishing up their meal, wearing all camo riding gear. The employee looked about 70, but you could tell he was maybe 45, but just chain smoked, and was probably an alcoholic. The way his pockmarked leathery skin floated on his face, and his breath and demeanor clearly exhibited his short temper. He said goodbye to the biker couple, and complimented the guy on having such a banging / kick-ass lady who would go biking with him, and who was easy on the eyes. They awkwardly agreed, and left. We sat down, and he brought us menus, and took drink orders. I said I wasn't having anything, and he eyed me weirdly, and left to get drinks. He came back with drinks, and then lingered at the table asking us where we are from. We said Oregon, and he went off on a tirade starting with "I'm not racist but," and about Trump, and how Facebook people are racist, because some Mexican on the internet said something negative about Trump, and then he blamed the poverty on the Mexicans, or whatever. We tried to not say anything, and just nod and smile. Their menu was surprisingly robust and reasonably priced. My cousin and his wife ordered some things, but were told they were out of all that stuff. Okay, they found something else on the menu they did have. My wife ordered a veggie burger. Never imagined they'd have that, because we are both vegetarian. He makes some joke about Oregon and vegetarians and us all being tree-hugging liberal hippies. Smile and nod. Meanwhile another guy walks in by himself, orders an iced tea and a bacon cheeseburger, gets the iced tea and waits. Another older couple enters, and when seated, says, "May I please have a menu?" And the employee dude loudly proclaims to nobody in particular, except to everyone in the place, "See, now there's the kind of language we need more of. Thank you for using proper English." Clearly he's not upset about immigrants. The dude leaves through a side hallway, and emerges with a lady, I assume his wife, who goes to a back room that we'll learn is the kitchen to make all the food. Later the guy brings our orders and the other patron's bacon cheeseburger. Except the veggie burger for my fiancé, except it has bacon on it. The other guy's bacon. So while we are waiting for him to return to get the order fixed, he comes back with another veggie burger, thinking we ordered 2. We say no, we only ordered 1, and this first one has bacon on it. He tries to argue with us that we definitely ordered what he brought, and why wouldn't we want this food. I leave for the bathroom. Turns out the side hallway goes to the other half of the building, which is a bathroom between. The hallway is plastered with probably 30 years of photos from the bar, every single one with some old guy showing his age progression. Apparently some local old dude practically lives at the bar. Also the bar was open, but there were no lights on, just 5 or 6 bar stools and 2 tables. The rest of the bar was piled with boxes of random shit. Could have probably fit 5 more tables, but completely filled with junk. The rest of the meal was pretty uneventful other than the guy continuing to make random Trump remarks to anyone who would look up, and especially me, since I wasn't eating. He glared at me, as if he didn't trust me, because I wasn't ordering anything. We called it Trump Cafe. Never again. This may not be popular opinion, but I'd have to say Venice, Italy. I fucking hate that place. There is like nothing to do there, except walk over small bridges at scaly smelly water, buy glass trinket, watching glass trinkets be made, which is cool, the first time. It's boring after the 10th, because there is nothing else to do, but everything aforementioned is just me not caring. I'm sure there are PPL who would really like it, but my biggest strife is the ducking people. Fuck Venetians. They are the biggest pricks I've ever met in all my traveling. And I've traveled quite a bit. I've traveled every Mediterranean European country, Dubai, Pakistan, and most of contiguous USA. I've never met a group of people more stuck up, uncaring, and complete assholes, until I went to Venice. Literally within 5 minutes of setting foot into that city a guy wanted to fight me, because my shoulder brushed his on accident on a crowded street. He only stopped his asshole ways when he saw I was with my family. 2 minutes later on the same busy faking street some chick's earbuds got caught on my sister's bag and she faking flips sheet. I spent 4 days there. I hated every day except for the first, since I still did things that I wanted to do there, but after 1 day there's not much else to do. Then again, maybe I don't know everything to do there, and we just so happened to come across some assholes. But I even asked my friend who lives in Italy. He even said that they can be pricks, and he doesn't like visiting it either. I'll say Watertown, New York, but any smallish town in the northeast United States/southeastern Canada. Think Gananoque for Canada. All small towns of the St. Lawrence Seaway, northern New York State and New England. I grew up in this part of the world in one of these towns, and my parents loved taking road trips to Boston, New York, Montreal, etc. I've been all over northeastern North America, northern New York State, and bordering towns in the Thousand Islands region of southern Ontario are pretty bad. Small towns in Quebec are the only exception to this. It really is La Belle Province. Albany is another city that looks like a ghost town today. It's so painfully obvious that that part of the world is on the decline, and it has only continued to be neglected by political interests, especially in terms of medical care and industry. Mining was large in some areas, and the environmental impact has ruined any natural beauty. Mental illness and drug use are rampant. The population is unsurprisingly on the decline. Our left, and the large-scale immigration that the government promises will bring in new skilled workers to revitalize the economies of these towns never actually happens. Immigrants go to large cities, and I don't blame them. Make no mistake, however, they are not the same as early settlers from Europe, settling in depopulated farming areas. There are no doctors, no lawyers, no pharmacists, no dentists, no manufacturing, only the elderly and those too sick to move away. Infrastructure is crumbling, and any money entering the local economies is quickly siphoned away. In more tropical climates, at least the warm weather makes small towns seem welcoming and habitable. Towns in northeastern North America seem like places where mass murderers live in the winters. They are difficult to get in and out of, and any important goods require driving an hour to the nearest major city. To get point, I live in a major city now and plan to move south as soon as I finish school. I've come to really resent the Northeast. There is nothing here for anyone with any ambition or talent. Lemme tell you about Clayton, New Mexico. In 2010, my college roommate and I decided to travel from our college town in Alabama to Colorado for a ski trip. On our return drive, we passed through this little blip on the map and decided to stop for some fuel for our bodies and car. We enter this Dairy Queen off the main road through town, and straight away this eerie feeling came over the both of us. The entire restaurant was silent, save for the beeping of the fryers. We placed our order, paid, and got our food without hearing a single word from our cashier. We sit down at a random booth and start eating, while most of the staff just stares at us. My roommate looks up from his burger, pauses, and points to the wall where there is a black and white photograph of a man post-execution, just hanging from the gallows. This really unsettled us, as that's not a picture one would expect to see in a family-oriented restaurant. A few minutes later, a van pulls into the parking lot, and out pours a man, woman, and no less than 8 children. They all enter the restaurant single file, and sit down at a couple of booths. Simultaneously, they all begin to stare at us. You know that mild chill you get when someone looks at you? Multiply that by 10. One of the younger children starts to say something, but is immediately silenced by a shush from her older sister before she could complete a single word. Their piercing stare continued for the remainder of our meal, which we finished as fast as we could. We get to the car and drive across the street for some gas. We pull in and draw straws as to who would have to get out and pump, as we were both really nervous, and there were more people at the gas station just staring at us. We fill up under the watchful eyes of the local townsfolk, got in the car, and got the fuck out of there. Neither of us will ever forget that experience. We were sure we were gonna die. Okay, probably not the worst place in the world, but the worst I have been to, the bad part of LA. Stayed at the DoubleTree, which appears to be built on the dividing line between good and bad parts of the city. Walk outside, turn right. Do not turn left. The number of homeless people there is amazing. We decided to catch a bus to the Santa Monica Pier, which took an hour to travel, a distance I could have walked in half an hour. Not sure whether we were going in the right direction. I asked the only other person on the bus that looked like they spoke English. It was an old lady who immediately began shouting at me in Spanish. One night, after going out for pizza, we were walking back to the hotel through a part of the city that apparently doesn't believe in electric lighting, and stumbled upon a prison in the middle of the city. It was so surreal, because we had only ever seen prisons in the middle of nowhere, and here was a big prison in a high-rise building in the middle of the city. We walked past at a good time too because there were inmates being unloaded from buses, just like in the movies. Men in bright orange and women in white, or the other way around. There wasn't even a fence, although they were all shackled together, so they couldn't escape, unless they were planning some sort of high-speed conga line point, since the area outside the prison was so dark we watched for a while, but it felt like we were doing something wrong, and left before someone asked what we were doing there. We headed back to the hotel, and felt fortunate that we didn't run into any wallet inspectors. Avenal, California. We were driving a 62 Lincoln Continental from San Diego to San Francisco when we threw a rod after a lot of other mechanical issues and had to get a tow to the closest town. The responding tow truck driver turned out to be a city official and the local pastor of Avenal, and he had no idea how to rig up our car. So while I rode in the cab, my buddy sat in the Lincoln to make sure we didn't fishtail. On our way in, the conversation went something like this. Me: so, what's Avenal all about? Driver: well, we used to have the oil fields, but them all dried up, so we got ourselves a chemical disposal site, but that got out of hand. By this time I'm noticing that the closer we get to Avenal, the deader everything is, but we are getting a new prison, so we are hoping that makes us some money. He dropped us off at the only motel in town, and, as we were checking in, through the bulletproof glass, a car came to a screeching halt, and the occupants yelled out, "Don't stay there, they'll rob you." Then they sped away as the tow truck driver slash city official slash pastor told us don't mind them. We got our room and settled in, and I was the first to go to take a shower. The bathroom was shared with the adjoining room, more on that in a bit, and neither door had locks. I figured the sound of a shower would be an indicator it was occupied, but whenever we were using the toilet, we had to hold on to both door knobs to make sure we weren't walked in on. After my shower, I got dressed and walked out into our room, sitting in a chair and putting my feet up on the bed. My buddy told me I needed to change my socks, and I told him I just did. Then I looked at my socks and saw that they were almost black from just the short walk to the chair. That night, while having cockroach races, we'd each choose a cockroach on the ceiling, pick a destination, then see which got there first. We heard someone try our door. Mind you, the locks were janky. I threw my mag light at the door and heard them slowly step away. We spent the rest of the night taking turns sleeping in a chair leaning against the door. While all this was happening, in the next room the eldest of the family was on his deathbed, so we basically slept to a man's dying moans and his Hispanic family saying random prayers in Spanish while sobbing. The next day we checked out and headed out to find food and a means to San Francisco. This was our first time walking in the town, and we found tumbleweeds blowing through the streets, one of the Rocky films still on the marquee of the boarded up theater, and no place at all to eat. We went to the Circle K. I thought those places disappeared in the 80s, to figure out how to get the hell out of there, and to get some food, and was told by the clerk about CART, Kings Area Rural Transit. We bought our tickets, ate our Circle K breakfast, hopped on the bus, and have never looked back. Venice, Italy. Now wait and hear me out before you roll your eyes at me. When you think of Venice, you think of romantic candlelit dinners and smooth rides in colorful gondolas over crystal clear water, viewing beautiful crafted stonework. You know what you might consider a prime jeweled city of Italy. It's nothing more but a terrible tourist trap. First off, to arrive at the city outskirts, thousands of people get dumped at the edge of Venice by bus. It's so crowded the people just pour into the street disrupting traffic, and everyone is fighting over boats. You wait by the edge, eventually flag one down through the crowd, settle on location and inquiry about price, then Mr. Angry Guy barges in and just bids higher. Like this was a fake auction for basic services. Eventually somehow someway you make it to the San Marcos Plaza, a town center in Venice. Every boat in Venice has just been dumping people here throughout the day. It's covered in tourist shops. I'm not talking like culturally inspired knickknacks or trinkets, more like selfie sticks or portable fan stores. People are just flooding everywhere, climbing on top of the statues, and overalls being an obnoxious mess. Not everyone, but with the density you see enough cases. Time to get out of Venice. There is one main path everyone is following, and it's just covered with top designer clothes and brands. It just felt like a horrid perversion of something that was once wonderful, something that once had depth, character and beauty had been turned out to an empty hallowed, husk tourist trap. Not even a shadow of its old glory. Point. I got lost through some alleyway, just needed to get away from people, met some interesting folks, and saw some kids. Tried talking with them in French/Spanish, they seemed to understand the struggle of their city, and took us to some graffiti pieces. I remember this image of a birdcage that stuck a chord with me. My friend commented that it's from a game. Point. Anyway, Venice, do yourself a favor and go to Milano. They have cute coffee bartenders in little vest, but their skills on brewing coffee is enough to woo any women. Farmington, New Mexico. Point. Stayed at a hotel there for one night while I was moving to Phoenix. Had 3 different drugged up dudes in the gated parking lot offer assistance in carrying my luggage. It got bad enough that I had my co-driver and an employee handle carrying the gear while I stood at the car with my comically large tire iron resting on my shoulder. I had a 5-foot long tire iron for my tiny Ford Escort's 13-inch wheels. Thing weighed like 70 pounds, and I was pretty buff at the time, so standing there with a scowl seemed to work at making them back off. I mean, I get it. You either want some money for your booze/heroin/meth addiction or to steal my sheet for the same purpose, but seriously, fuck off. I'm driving a faking 14-year-old station wagon. Do you really think my stuff is worth a lot? When I did the reverse move away from Phoenix back to where I came from, I chose to pay the Denver tolls instead of going through an at all. Point. Speaking of Phoenix, don't intend to ever live there again. I didn't personally ever get robbed or anything, but the gangs in the area loved to target people I knew. Had a dude successfully rob a group of 8 people I knew because he was brandishing a faking loaded AK-47 in broad daylight at them. Point. At the time, good old Sheriff Facted Arpaio was still in charge and managing to do absolutely nothing to stop shit like that. But his law enforcement still had plenty of time to pull over a Malaysian friend once every week when he went to do his grocery shopping on his bike after work. Young Asian man riding a bike at 8 PM with grocery bags. Clearly a faking gangbanger, not at all like the squad of actual gang member T-Wats that rented out the top floors of a nearby hotel and used it to scout mugging targets with binoculars. Everybody faking knew you didn't brandish anything valuable along that section of Baseline Road, yet the cops did faking nothing about it. Point. No, the cops were too busy. They had to lock up the non-violent drug offenders under Fuckhead Arpaio's command inside the prison camps. Boston, UK. Literally the shittiest hellhole I've ever encountered. I'm working as a security steward in the Lincolnshire area, and one time I agreed to work at a venue in Boston. Long story short, colleague got stabbed, got jumped by Polish trash. The top nightclub, the whole city during daytime as well, is filled of drunk mixed Eastern Euro factory workers who think they are real G's, and they hate the police, medics, the English people and especially bouncers. During daytime, all you see is white trash Eastern Europeans who are bitter towards the local English population ever since Brexit. Boston had the highest pro-Brexit vote count. Customer service is non-existent. The place is filled with shitty low-quality Polish food shops. The only thing I enjoyed about the place was an Indian fast food takeaway restaurant, which was being operated by a cool Indian guy and his mom from Sheffield. Since I'm a coffee addict, I went to their best coffee shop and the whole place was a bumfest. Point. If I were to become a factory worker based in this city, I would likely kill myself by jumping off their stupid cathedral, since it's the only building high enough to guarantee a swift death. 0/10. Nassau, Bahamas. Went on a cruise. Point. First, walking through the cruise terminal was crowded and way too many sellers getting in your face. They didn't have a bathroom. Luckily a security guard took pity on me and let me use an employee bathroom. Point. Second, dudes just walking up putting bracelets on you, then demand you pay for them. I jerked my arm away and firmly said no thank you, but my poor country boy husband was in culture shock. I had to physically step between them. I'm 5'1". Super threatening. They don't give a shit about the city security walking around. Third, people in the shittiest straw market chasing you down to come see their shop, which is just a section of an aisle. They'll literally try to corner you against the booth to pressure you to buy their handmade stuff. Some lady grabbed my wrist to pull me forth. I was offered weed twice. No big problem with that, but I feel you just don't approach random people when people will be searching you out. Again, there was security not even 10 feet away, and fifth, a homeless guy attempted to mug me. He asked if I had a cigarette, and I said nah man, all I have is this one, and walked away. Then walked back and said you can have this one, I'll share his, meaning my husband, and he was like oh no that's okay. He wanted me to open my backpack so he could either take it or survey the inventory. Security within earshot, like I get that all cruise cities pretty much depend on tourists to fund their economy, but Nassau was a complete shithole. St. Louis was moving across the country with my wife, and we made a road trip out of it, stopping at tourist traps and famous landmarks etc. point. So we rolled into St. Louis and my wife just has to visit the Arch before we would stop to eat BBQ. We love BBQ and St. Louis is obviously pretty famous for it. I was super stoked for the BBQ and did some research online and also had asked some people where we should go. Most people named this one place, can't remember the name, so decided to go there. We start the grand adventure by rolling around for 30 minutes looking for parking down by the river, which is not aesthetically pleasing in any way. Finally park and make our way to the concrete desert that is the Arch and get in line to get in. For those who have never been to the Arch, there is a large room/building beneath it where you enter to get access. This took about 45 minutes. Once inside we had to get in line to get a ticket to go up the Arch. This was another 30 minutes. Once we got our passes we had to wait around for our number or whatever to get called, another 45 minutes. Finally we take this rickety old contraption, not sure how else to describe it, but it might have been the only somewhat interesting thing about the whole experience. Takes us up to the top or the arch point. The doors open to a tiny little hallway covered ceiling to floor in carpet with little itty bitty windows to look out of that are completely surrounded by a ton of people with even more behind them waiting to see. I looked at my wife and said fuck this, we are already late for BBQ, and walk straight across to the other side to get a ride back down. We finally get back to the car and head to this BBQ place, which is supposed to be amazing, only to find that a little excursion took so long that the line for BBQ was wrapped around the building and down the block. I literally snapped and went on a tirade about lines. Fuck you Street Louis, you ruined my BBQ experience, and KC was way better. I'm a pie and I once had to handle a theft case for petro oil at one of their biodiesel plants in Selma, Alabama. Now my first thought was what anyone would think, oh, cool, Selma is where the Civil Rights March took place, there will be lots of history to look at. In my downtime, me being a history buff, I was a little intrigued. So, I get to Selma, and it is nothing like I imagined. It was dirty and grungy, and every single store had about 15 feet of Kevlar glass protecting the clerk from anyone meant to do them harm. I had never seen this in every store in any town. It took me forever to find a hotel that didn't look like I could be robbed at any time. The place I had to sit and watch was out in the middle of nowhere, kind of disconcerting for a 4 minutes and 11 seconds female working alone, such as myself. Thankfully, I'm always armed. I had to watch this place all night while I was there, because apparently the CEO of the job site was having one of his workers order too much copper wiring. Then the worker would come to the job site at around 2 or 3 AM and pick up the extra wiring, and they would take it home, strip it down, and sell the copper to the scrap yards in the area. They made about 25k in just a matter of a few months. I ended up getting enough evidence to nail all of the people involved, and the CEO actually put a bullet in his mouth after the charges were filed. But I digress. I did end up getting to spend my last 3 nights in a wonderful old hotel on the river that was built in the early 1800s and was still decorated and smelled like it was from that era. I fully expected to see some old gunslinger or Civil War soldier walk through my room at any moment. But no such luck. I wish that had been the case. Anyways, back to the town itself. I was truly disappointed. It did have many historical landmarks, and the bridge that the civil rights protesters marched across on their trek, the one where they were met by law enforcement and weren't allowed by them to cross during their first attempt, is still standing today, and it was most definitely worth seeing. The rest of the town however is dark and dirty and a little intimidating and not any place I would ever care to return to. Can't remember the city name right now, but it was a city in Turkey. Visited it when I was 17 with my family, and as tourists everyone except my dad, who everyone there assumed was Turkish himself despite being a pure Irish man, hated it. The city itself was beautiful, but it was the shops that we hated. They sold nice stuff, but the people who worked there were awful. They all used to stand in the middle of the street, and every one of them would try and stop us. Every single time. Tried waking away they would follow, or actually grab our arm. One day on my own I was literally pulled off the street into a store and the man blocked the only exit saying I can leave after I buy something. Tried passing him, he pushed me back and told me to buy something. Told him I had no money on me, and he didn't believe me, even though I actually didn't have money on me. Looked around for a minute, and when he realized I didn't actually have money on me, he grabbed me and threw me out, giving out about wasting his time and leading him on 2 weeks of being stopped multiple times on every street, pulled into stores, followed around each store, shopkeepers speaking a line or two of Irish to try and seem nice, telling me to buy things I didn't want, even trying to sneakily add things to my purchase. When I did buy something, I hated walking down the streets. I bought earphones to help avoid them. Did not help. Would have them pulled out of my ears on the street by the same people, even the man who sold me them. The only way to avoid them was walking with my dad, who tanned incredibly quickly and actually looked Turkish. Didn't bother us if we were with him. Loved the city, but never going back again. Speaking within the US, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I lived there for 2 years. The majority of my friends there have been mugged, some at gunpoint, some along main roads with plenty of people and traffic. When I lived in the dorms at Milwaukee, people were routinely mugged on campus, including right outside the dorms, and when I moved to an apartment elsewhere, it wasn't uncommon to hear gunshots nearby now and again. I got lucky in that I was only ever chased through downtown at midnight by a homeless person, but I made a point of not going around alone at night most of the time. Where I lived near the end of my time there was blacklisted for food delivery, and the neighborhood drive-thrus with bulletproof glass were the norm. On top of all the murders that happened there, it lacks basically any culture. All there is to do is drink, and it's one of the most racially segregated cities in the US, with some insanely racist people. Unlike some places that have a lot of violence, but also have culture and life and things to do, there is no reason to visit Milwaukee unless you are obsessed with shitty beer, sewage-filled lake water that makes beach swimming a game of am I gonna get sick, cooking to death in the summer, freezing to death in the winter, and if you survive that, being mugged or shot. I'm sure some people find the good in Milwaukee. And maybe it's improved in the last 8 years. Maybe some people find the good in it. I ain't gonna be the one to sing any real praise for it though, and I'm not going back again. Really the only good part, the endless, cold void of Lake Michigan to the east. It's kinda pretty, and if you can forget that it's probably full of overflow sewage, it can help you forget you live in Milwaukee for a few minutes. Rome, Italy. Seriously. You hear glamorous stories of how wonderful it is there. The history and the architecture is there for sure, and was the only silver lining to that leg of my trip. All the locals I came across were very rude. I'm sure dealing with tourists every day can get tiring, but have some pride in the place you live. Be more open to share your knowledge of the history and culture you grew up in. I was baffled and honestly disappointed to leave there really only learning the book stuff from tour guides I encountered while I was there. Made friends in London, Amsterdam, and Paris. Italy was just a total wash. The weather was pretty terrible. It rained the first 2 days, then turned hot and muggy for the last 2. The weather is of course out of anybody's control, so I don't hold it against anybody. It just really added to the already damper atmosphere. The lines everywhere, not just tourist locals, but bookstores, shops, and restaurants were worse than some theme parks I have been to, and the traffic. It's not the quantity, it's the quality point. But the most disappointing part was the food. The authentic Italian food I was so looking forward to did not live up to my expectations. After trying their different places we ended up just sticking to the main chains. I think the best meal I had there was at Hard Rock. I learned if you want some good Italian food, Try the place in the train station in Switzerland. I will definitely be going back to Europe. I have a plane booked to Amsterdam in September actually, but I won't ever be returning to visit Rome. I have a feeling Reddit isn't going to relate to my opinion, and I will probably be in the minority here, but hey, that was my experience, and it sucked. Cycle, Texas. When I was about 10 years old, my dad made me go with him, his wife and her kids. I lived with my grandmother at the time, on a hunting trip. My stepmother's drug addicted sister lived there, so we had to stay with her. Indoor plumbing was not a thing in Cycle, Texas at the time. It still may not be, I wouldn't know. The bathroom was a toilet over a literal sheet hole. The house was next to a cemetery, which scared the hell out of me immediately upon arrival. The man next door was about 70 years old and tried to pay my stepmother for sex. Fun times all around. At one point during the trip, my stepmom and her sister took us to visit someone who lived around 3 miles down the road. They both proceeded to get sheet-faced and decided the best thing to do was to have me, the 10-year-old, drive them and the other 6 kids, 4 step-cousins and 2 step-siblings, back to the house. They told me to just stay on the road and don't turn no matter what. As I passed the driveway, they both screamed turn. I promptly mashed on the gas and yanked the wheel and drove straight over a fence pole. The day we finally get all ready to leave, we walk out of the house and my stepsister starts yelling that she forgot something, and it's decided that I should climb in the window to get it. There were no keys to the house. They always locked it and just sent a kid through the window to unlock it. I climb through the window and it falls on my fingers with enough force that the tip of my middle and ring finger burst like a balloon. Once they get the window open again and I stop screaming, I go to unlock the door and the faking thing wasn't even locked. We then discover the car is dead because the transmission has a hole in it, probably from the fence post I ran over. My dad trades his rifle for a super shitty car that breaks down about 50 or 60 miles into the trip home. My aunt and uncle come pick us up and take us the rest of the way home. So yeah, Cycle, Texas. Harvey, Illinois was working night shift at a restaurant and decided to give a friend a ride to his cousins, who he had to stay with for like 2 weeks. Got off work at 1:30 p.m. on a Friday night and drove him there. The rate of liquor stores and churches was worrying me as we got closer. The very apparent depreciation of the streets and lack of lit street lights also had me a bit worried as well. We were pulling down the street and past a cul-de-sac with about 6 cop cars, all lights lit up, 2 ambulances. As we passed, I made a joke that I was glad he didn't live on that street, which he laughed and agreed. Then he told me next left, like the next street down. Another cul-de-sac. It's at the end on the left. You can turn around at the end too. The end of the cul-de-sac did not have houses at the end. It looked like a small forest just grew into the cul-de-sac. I had to go to the bathroom when he asked me if I wanted to smoke really quick as a thank you, so I said okay. He was like, okay, come with me inside really quick. You can go to the bathroom and I'll grab some bud. Me trying to be polite eventually walked up to the decrepit house with ivy growing all over it. Now I'm a white guy, so walking up to and into this house was one of the scariest things I've ever had happen to me. Walking up, there was house rap music blasting out the open windows. I got in, and 4 black guys were sitting around a coffee table covered in cocaine/weed/liquor bottles on a couch. I kid you not, there was a Glock on the table. They all stared at me, and my friend introduced me and said I was cool and gave him a ride home. He said I was going to the bathroom really quick while he grabbed bud. I asked where the bathroom was, and one guy just pointed down the hall. I walked down the hall and past an open room with 2 black girls passed out half naked on a mattress on the floor. No sheets or blankets, just some towels in the room. I went to the bathroom, which I can only assume had never been cleaned. The toilet was missing the tank's top piece and looks like someone pissed right into the tank. I figured up really quickly and asked my friend if he wanted to go outside and roll up. We went out to the car, rolled up, and started smoking when some guy from inside walked up to my car incredibly drunk, opened my back door and got in. Slurring and being incredibly ignorant, demanded I pass to him as well. So I did. He became really friendly, grabbed my shoulder like 4 times, and I was like alright, time to go. My friend thanked me one more time and apologized about the other guy. Could not get out of there any faster. Passed about 3 groups walking in the middle of the streets on my way to the highway. Sioux Falls, South Dakota. We were moving from Virginia to Montana and we stopped there one night. Figured it was a bigger city, so they might have a nice hotel. Booked a Comfort Inn over the phone on our way that had 3 stars, which was the most we could find. We had 2 young kids at the time and we were going to be arriving late, so we wanted to make sure it was ready to go. Room was older and, in the darkness of night it seemed fine, if not a bit smelly. Light of day was a different story. We took the kids to the pool in the morning to burn off a little energy before getting back in the car, and immediately after jumping in realized that I wasn't at all sure we wouldn't catch something gross. After swimming briefly, we headed back to our room to discover a huge commotion in the room beside us. Turns out there was a long-term resident next door that would routinely request massive amounts of alcohol be delivered. Not a problem, except it was time for their weekly inspection and the hotel couldn't get in. Turned out the resident decided to stop using the toilet at all, opting to instead decorate the entire room with their alcohol delivery food fuel sheets before dying in the room a couple of days before. Police, paramedics, and hotel staff clogged the hall so that we couldn't exit the room with our young children for several hours. We fled as fast as we could after complaining and getting a half-hearted apology and a promise to refund the cost of the room. Went to check out the falls in a desperate attempt to salvage the visit, only to realize they weren't impressive, more like a large creek, all the while thinking the entire town seemed the sort of town that produces serial killers. Actually, it has. It wasn't until the next day that we realized the hotel charged us 3 times. After several rather loud phone calls we were issued a full return of everything they charged us. Never again. Went to Washington DC for a high school choir trip, and then later for a high school orchestra trip in 2000 and 2001. The architecture was great, but a large majority of high school students aren't really interested in beautifully designed building. I am, so that was actually fun for me. Unfortunately, it was the only fun part. Point, the people there drive like sheet. We were stuck in 4 lanes of non-moving traffic on a coach on some pikeway or other, so a few people who, in typical Washington DC fashion, decided they were more equal than others, decided to pass the traffic up on the shoulder. That produced a 5th lane of standstill traffic who, and no one here is surprised by this, turned on their blinkers, or didn't, and forced themselves into any opening that came along. As if that wasn't bad enough, some people went so far as to pull into the grass beside the road and try to bypass the bypassing traffic. It was a surreal show of entitlement nearly 2 decades before the conservatives ever came up with the term snowflake. The people were rude. The tourists were rude to other tourists, and to the employees unfortunate enough to have to deal with them. The employees, in what I can only imagine is a conditioned defense against rudeness, were preemptively rude to customers they had to serve. Point, the prices were outrageous. I've only ever seen more tourist trappy pricing in Toronto, Canada, where they went is a few blocks from Niagara Falls sells a classic double with cheese sandwich, not meal, for $7. And this is more, of course, that's my luck than I blame the city, but January in Washington DC gets pretty cold, so when the hotel you and 30 classmates, chaperones, and your teacher are staying at has a kitchen fire and evacuates the hotel at 2:15 am, remember to grab a blanket. Actually, that part of the trip wasn't so bad, because both Caitlin and Catherine didn't think of that, leading to probably the only time in my life I'll be in the same blanket as a pair of good-looking twins who are smiling at me and thanking me. Not a city specifically, but an airport. Frankfurt. I had a layover there for about 5 hours a few weeks ago on my way to Naples for vacation, and it was the worst experience I've ever had. Nobody knows how to freaking walk. Why are you walking so slowly? And then get pissed when others don't walk fast. All of the good restaurants are behind random visa checkpoints and stuff, so if you want to go to a good restaurant you have to wait in line for 20 minutes, get your passport stamped, then go eat, and there are like no maps of the airport anywhere, so you basically just have to hope you're going in the right direction, which is confusing sometimes, because some of the B gates are separate from the other B gates and stupid stuff like that. It made me so irrationally angry, just being there in that terrible place. that I changed my return flight, so I had a layover elsewhere. I will never have a layover in Frankfurt ever again. Edit. Also, my vacation was in Amalfi, but no travel agent tells you that to get from Amalfi to anywhere takes about 2 hours, because there's basically only one long road that winds up and down the cliffs and mountains. The ferries don't start running until noonish, and the closest train station is an hour and a half away in Sorrento. That sucks for me, because I wanted to take a train to Rome on a day trip, but all of that was cut short when we found how difficult it was to escape Amalfi. That really sucked, and while I'd still go to Amalfi, I would never stay in Amalfi ever again. Slough. In the south of England there's even a poem about how shit it is. Slough come friendly bombs, and fall on slough. It isn't fit for humans now, there isn't grass to graze a cow. Swarm over, death. Come, bombs and blow to smithereens those air conditioned, bright canteens, tinned fruit, tinned meat, tinned milk, tinned beans, tinned minds, tinned breath. Mess up the mess they call a town. A house for 97 down and once a week a half a crown for 20 years. And get that man with double chin who'll always cheat and always win, who washes his repulsive skin in women's tears, and smash his desk of polished oak and smash his hands so used to stroke and stop his boring dirty joke, and make him yell. But spare the bald young clerks who add the profits of the stinking cad. It's not their fault that they are mad, they've tasted hell. It's not their fault they do not know the bird song from the radio. It's not their fault they often go to Maidenhead and talk of sport and makes of cars in various bogus Tudor bars and ain't look up and see the stars but belch instead. In labor-saving homes, with care their wives frizz out peroxide hair and dry it in synthetic air and paint their nails. Come, friendly bombs and fall on slough to get it ready for the plow. The cabbages are coming now, the earth exhales. I've gotta say Glover, Vermont, or even St. Johnsbury, Vermont. The towns are in no means the worst places on earth, especially compared to the ones listed above. I think they're safe, at least I didn't have any problems, and the people are mostly liberals, which is fine with me. But goddamn, I felt like I was back in the 1800s. Firstly, there is nothing up there. I mean at all. Oh, you got your gallon of VT maple syrup? Good, go home. There's nothing left to see. I was in Glover for business, got in on a Monday night around 6 PM, after about 12 hours of driving, and not a single faking restaurant or gas station was open. Everything was closed. Nothing in the surrounding area was open either. Everyone closes up shop around 5 because they're small, village towns. Went to a tiny little diner the following day for some lunch. This place was so small the door honestly hit the counter when you walked in. It's noon, and they hand me a breakfast menu. Lunch doesn't happen until 1, which was fine, but I was feeling travel exhausted between meetings and I didn't want something heavy and covered in syrup, as delicious as it is. All the locals know each other, and seeing redneck liberals is really weird. Met some guy who was complaining about a greenie kid who quit logging with him to go log with someone else that was paying him $1 more. Most of the locals treated me like I was an alien. The houses and businesses, what little there are all run down and tiny. The town's literally a little village off 91. There's one main street about a mile long and that's it. That's the whole town. Finding gas or food was just about impossible. Or a cell signal, for that matter, so fuck if you go there on business like I did. Staying up to date with my boss was nearly impossible. Between appointments I had no idea what to do. I sat in a little memorial park somewhere near the border of Canada. In the woods, the trees were covered with panties and bras hanging, or nailed onto them. Trophies, I guess. I have pics for proof. There was also a den of some big animal nearby. I guess Vermont is a hardcore, faking next to bears or wolves or something. In short, I don't hate Vermont and it's not the absolute worst place to go, see above. But I have no desire to go back ever again. Doha, Qatar. After spending 2 mesmerizing weeks in the Maldives we had to stay 8 hours between our flight back home there. To be fair, the comparison couldn't be more extreme. 2 weeks with barely 50 people on an island with nothing but our water bungalow, palms and a bar/restaurant compared to this strange place which was Doha. The city is busy and dead at the same time. The many empty skyscrapers seemed almost surreal. We decided to visit a mall nearby the airport and frankly it was kinda disgusting. Between the dirtiest standing toilets there was the most expensive jewelry stores I ever saw. They even had gold machines where you could buy small gold bars, as if they were chocolate bars. The always present passive aggressiveness of the locals was finally topped by us almost getting kidnapped in front of the mall. We were looking for a taxi when some men approached us and directed us to a shitty car with no markings or any hint that this would be a taxi. I was with my parents-in-law who happened to be the first in the car. They didn't suspect anything. I was still hesitating when the driver seemed to get angry because I made him wait. The scene was busy, and I also ended up in the car, which was too small for all of us. When we were all in, I noticed that the driver spoke to two other men standing by a pickup truck and giving them a pretty clear hand sign to follow along. In that moment our door opened, and a security guard from the mall asks us to get out of the car and follow. He had witnessed the scene and organized us a real ride to the airport. It was one of the worst days of my life. I don't care if I misjudge the city because of this relatively short experience, but I hate this place from my heart and will only be at their shitty airport when I visit the Maldives again, which honestly is the most beautiful place on earth, and I lost my heart there. Village, but Bethel, Alaska, shittiest faking village in the state, with nothing going for it at all. Above ground sewage, one of the highest rates of suicide, domestic violence, rap, and alcoholism in the state, which already has the highest rates for all of those. I went a week after they had a school shooting, where a kid killed the principal and the star basketball player, and there were still bullet holes in the lockers. Nobody moves there by choice, except for sometimes the people that live in the even tinier satellite villages for which Bethel is actually the hub city. Like, milk is $10 a gallon or so in Bethel. It has to be flown by tiny plane or even driven out on snow machines or four-wheelers or dogs to the even tinier villages. They don't even have electricity in those places. Second shittiest is Naknek, Alaska, where I grew up. Most of the shittiness of Bethel, but no above ground sewage. I still had kids try to run me over on their four-wheelers every day walking home from school at -59 for the unconscionable crime of being a white kid and smart though. Fun fact about Naknek, there is a smaller village across the Naknek River, South Naknek, that has about 70 people and a school that's preschool 6th grade, with 2 grades per class. About 2 to 4 kids per class. After 6th grade, they load the kids up in a little plane, fly them across the river, and fly them back after school. We called it the flying school bus. My family moved to the city when I was in 10th grade, and I have never been back, and have no intention to. Most of the kids that grow up there never leave, never have any real jobs other than whatever their family did, run the grocery store, run the gas station, fish, or just live on the property their family has, and live off their native checks. Anybody that owns a house there is permanently stuck there, unless they somehow land a job in the city that pays for them to be able to maintain 2 houses, because nobody will ever buy, or even rent any property there, as there is literally zero reason to move there. The only money that exists is in fishing, and that's seasonal. I stopped in Clewiston, Florida several years ago to restock on sunscreen and snacks for our road trip. The entire town stank like rotten vegetables, and as soon as you left your car, you were assaulted by horseflies the size of your pinky fingernail. They were everywhere, so it was inevitable that they would smack into you at full speed. You could feel it through your clothing. It was constant. One hit me in my glasses, and it was audible. The layout in this Walmart didn't make any sense, and when we stopped an employee to ask for help, he smiled a big toothless grin, pointed us the wrong way, and bumped into me as he walked away. Fortunately I was one of those douchebags with a wallet chain at the time, and his attempt to lift my wallet was aborted once he realized this. "Sorry, excuse me," he said, as my wallet jingled and fell back into my pocket. Flies were less common indoors than out, but the smell and flies still permeated the store. One flew into my girlfriend's mouth, setting off a coughing and gagging fit. There were no employees around that we could see, so we kept wandering. We finally found the sunscreen area, and it was empty, somehow covered in dust. How long had they been out of sunscreen? Then I spotted the toothless employee again, just staring. We got even more creeped out. By then we'd mostly stopped talking, afraid that more bugs would fly into our mouths. We grabbed a few snacks and the only water bottle we could find in the entire store, and we got back into the car as quickly as possible. Never stop in Clewiston. What a nasty sketchy town. Kannapolis, North Carolina. Being very you and dumb, my friends were trying to find Molly back in the day. A friend of a friend of a friend says he has the HK up. Enter Kannapolis trailer park. One dude is passed out and my ex asks if he's alive. They force us to go outside and are already getting in the backseat of my car. I thought this guy was our HK up, but apparently we had to make a trip. Remember, I was you and dumb Trump might to get Molly so I could have a great time with my ex. 15 minutes later we arrive at a street called Cadillac Street in what looks like a movie set to stereotypical trap house. Now joke, wait 20 minutes for the dude to go in the house and out. Okay, we get our stuff and I'm listening to directions from the guy to get back to the trailer park. Except we are going down different streets. Suddenly the dude tells us to pull in a visit video rental parking lot. I'm sketch at this point and I'm scared. Are we about to get jumped? Car pulls up next to ours. Dude gets out and begins to beat the shit out of the other driver. I'm with my ex, a friend, and the dude getting fighting and his girlfriend. I tell his girl that if he doesn't get back in the car in the next 5 minutes I'm leaving and she can hop out too. I look up and now they aren't fighting but hugging. The dude gives the other dude a package. I unknowingly was the driver for a lot of meth. Dropped Tweedledee and Tweedledum off and never set foot in that town again. Molly was good though. New York City. Keep in mind that this is purely a matter of opinion, but we had a week-long trip there with my senior class in high school, and it is most definitely not the place for me. I will say I enjoyed seeing Phantom of the Opera on Broadway, and I would have liked to have seen the High Line, but I don't know if I want to deal with the cold nature of the folks there ever again. The hardest part with which to cope was the cold attitudes. We had one waitress that stuck her nose up at us and said, "Well, why don't I make it convenient for you?" when asked politely if she could split the bill amongst the 4 of us at breakfast. Then another that got angry because my lactose intolerant friend couldn't eat the ice cream that came with the meal and asked if there were any alternatives. The waiter was out for blood over that bowl of ice cream, and rather than let it be, when my friend said not to worry about it, politely and in all seriousness, the waiter dragged a manager over to the table. This was one of those large group prepaid meals with a limited selection of dinners for the students, so I reckon he was trying to cover his rear in a bowl of ice cream not being served, but the attitude that came along with it was entirely unnecessary, and dragging a manager into it just made the matters worse. The generally poor experiences that are also likely tied to the tourist trap that is Manhattan, compounded by a general uneasiness and grimy nature of surroundings, has entirely dissipated my interest in going back to New York City. Coming from the southern US, it was a bit of a culture shock, even more so than when I spent 3 months in Prague. I felt safer and more warmly accepted in Prague than in New York City. The city even felt cleaner, and we were staying out in Prague 10, a good distance from Old Town. I went to Penang, Malaysia once, and only once. Asia is beautiful and has its treasures and pitfalls like everywhere else, but Penang was a different beast. It is located split between a rainforest island and an expansive port on the Malay Peninsula, with causeways and air trams between. Sounds like a paradise, I know. But, with nearly 2 million people in that city, yearly summer, sitting right on the equator, you might guess where I'm going this. I got into the air tram to take me to scenic and beautiful Penang Island, or Georgetown as it's been called since the English occupation. The air tram sounded good, but it wasn't. Think 50 people stuffed inside a walk-in closet. They all stepped in and rode the 15 minutes just fine. Coughing, sneezing, spitting, fidgeting, crowding, and pushing, later screaming in some apparently meaningful way to other screaming women, not in the slightest bothered by the heat, smell, claustrophobia, or their own children screaming or crying. Not sure what they were complaining about, but it didn't seem to be any of those things. The heat was well into the high 90s in that box. The senses were overwhelmed with disgust and exhaustion. When I close my eyes and think of hell, that's it. It was much less than an hour, but burned a memory into me so deep I still have claustrophobia to this day, and never did before then. The smell, it was ungodly. Not of this world. Take BO. Then take fish. Then make them rot in the sun. Then spread all the juice and chunks, and then rub it all over that 5x5 foot box. Then let it sit in the sun again. That's what was going on that day, and probably every day since then. If you ever have a chance to take the Skytram to Georgetown from Penang, Malaysia, just don't. Trust me. For the Germans, it's not the worst, and I would actually go back, but I first lived in Gelsenkirchen/Ruhrgebiet when I moved to Germany, when it was at its worst. I would take the streetcar past Schalke to Bochum for German class and often would cry when I got home, vomit and piss from the drunkards in the middle of the day or some drunk neo-Nazi beating up a disabled man. My husband kept saying I'm sure it's not that bad, but a few years later he was watching a docu called The Worst Streetcar Line in Europe, and it was that line that I took every day as a newcomer to Germany. Our street was a bit depressing. Most of the shops were boarded up, and across the street from our place, the houses were all condemned because they were falling into mine shafts below. Our horizon was just smokestacks and mine tailings piles and a thick smog. The buildings on either sides were asylum houses. People were spitting, hawking, or pissing all over the place. Clothes hung out were often black or dark grey. While it was not on the same level of Chennai, Juarez or Gari, Indiana, because there were not a lot of dead bodies or higher level of violent crime, and certainly no real gangs aside from the Romanian pickpocketing rings and Russian mafia, it was a terrible representation for my first glimpse of European living, and the population density combined with the unemployment and depression rates was horrid for a western city. I got robbed in Bochum, and generally just felt dirty the entire time I was there. We have since moved to southern Germany, and I have heard that Gelsenkirchen has really improved and bounced back, much like Detroit did. Prior to settling down and having a career in tech, I traveled the US extensively and have lived all over the country. I can honestly say that Camden, NJ, and East St. Louis, Illinois, both of which I have lived across the river/state border from, are two of the worst. I have not been to Mississippi or Alabama or Alaska, so I cannot comment on those states, but have been everywhere else. My impressions: I'm from Southern California, grew up here, live here now. It's overrated. Minnesota, awesome if you can handle the long winters. Minneapolis was one of the best large cities. Indiana, more beautiful and fun than you'd expect, especially the northeast quadrant of the state. There and western Ohio have some of the most beautiful and down-to-earth young ladies you're likely to find in the entire US. Pennsylvania, Philadelphia. Philly is awesome. The people there are just the shit. There are exceptions, but I found people in Philly, be they black, white, rich, poor, whatever, to be some of the most real, laid-back, cool motherfuckers in the world. There are exceptions, but I'd trade LA for many neighborhoods in Philly every day of the week. Camden, NJ. When I was young, over 20 years ago, I was self-employed as a drug smuggler for a short time. I had grown up in LA, had contact with people from various gangs/Mexican mafia, etc. Was in LA on the night of the riots as a 20-year-old who had just caught a Lou Reed concert at the Greek. Never was intimidated by just being somewhere, until Camden. Back in those days I had been in a lot of hairy situations, so bad neighborhoods don't even faze me still, with one exception, Camden, NJ. There are certain areas of that town that when I was there I just wanted to get the fuck out of. Depressed, drugged neighborhoods all look the same. Abandoned, boarded up homes, abandoned cars, trash, desperate people, but generally people leave each other alone. Parts of Camden are scary as fuck because there are gangs of young kids. I never had a problem being around gangsters at the time because anyone I had to deal with was disciplined and isn't going to do anything stupid. They don't want the heat or the hassle. Parts of Camden are so faked up with young armed kids willing to do anything. I got the feeling you could lose your life as easily as you could lose your keys, and even driving through there once as an adult, just to show my wife what a truly bad neighborhood looks like. It still has that quality. I'm not talking about all of Camden, I'm talking about the ghetto neighborhoods, where the cops don't even go. I'd take Southside Chicago any day of the week over that place. North Carolina, beautiful state with great people. Florida, tourists, old people, and more fucking crazy than all the rest of the country combined. East St. Louis, don't know what it's like now, but mid-90s, when I was there, it was like a less faked up Camden, so those are the two worst if you ask me. Camden and East St. Louis for the record, fact regular St. Louis too. San Francisco. Unfortunately, I have to travel there frequently for work. That said, every time I go I have a negative experience. The first time I went, I took the Caltrain from the airport, or reasonably close to the airport, to Palo Alto. I had never used the Caltrain before, and wasn't sure where to buy tickets. I asked a woman on the platform where the ticket kiosks were, and the only response I got was a long elevator stare, glare, punctuated by a dismissive PFFD. Second time I went there, I had to buy a new hoodie, because San Francisco is cold as hell, surprisingly, so I ended up going to an American Apparel. The staff couldn't be bothered to point me in the direction of the sweatshirts, and when I asked if I could use a change room, I got a sigh, a roll of the eyes, and a silent foot-stomping march to the change room, which could only be unlocked by an employee, so I gather this was within their realm of responsibilities. Third, fourth, fifth, etc. have all been marked by rude, dismissive interactions with people of all socio-economic, race, gender and age demographics. Moreover, any culture that this city once had, has long since been replaced by vanilla, milquetoast brand of homogeneity. The city has pushed out anyone of character, and replaced it with a bunch of software developers suffering from arrested development. There's a distinct gender imbalance, and social importance is dictated by how garishly you spend your money on meaningless tech, gratuitously over-the-top dining experiences, how much cheese and bacon do you want to put on your food, coffee, and craft beer. On top of that, the few people who don't fit into the description above all seem to be homeless. I'm not denigrating the homeless, but rather the city itself, and the way they treat their homeless. Those that don't get shipped off to some place in Arizona, are pushed into the Tenderloin or the Mission. They're all clearly suffering from some form of health condition, mental disability or psychological problem, and yet they live in their own filth without any consideration from the taxpayers who, clearly, make enough money to spend some of it on ensuring that the least fortunate in their city have a place to go at night. I say this as someone who splits their time between Toronto and New York. San Francisco has the worst homelessness problem I have ever seen. Ever. Even factoring in less economically developed countries such as Thailand, Vietnam, and Cuba. I have seen more people urinating/defecating on the sidewalk in a week in San Francisco than I have seen in my lifetime visiting New York City. People exist in squalor, and the city does nothing but ignore it. San Francisco is a shithole, and a ghost of what it once was. Minneapolis, Minnesota. I went there with a friend to see one of our favorite bands perform the end of their tour. We are a bit obsessed, and it was just awful. Upon arriving we attempted to find a bank for 2 hours. Apparently the bank had just up and moved without notifying anyone or changing their location on Google Maps. We start asking people if they know where the bank is or could direct us there. We are met with cold glares and straight up ignored almost every time. After finally finding the bank we stopped to eat at a sandwich shop. Upon arriving, the two workers proceeded to finish their very personal conversation before finally looking at me and my friend and demanding, What do you want?" Being from Colorado we took it as maybe not everyone is as friendly or hi as we are used to. We make it to our hotel and head to the first night of the show. After some heavy drinking I head upstairs to use the First Avenue venue bathroom. Upon leaving, I tripped over my feet a bit, but regained my composure. I was immediately grabbed and forced downstairs, being told we heard you puking, you have to leave. After telling them I did no such thing, and explaining I had come all the way from the west to see this show, they allowed me to stay. In a moment of unplanned retaliation my friend did end up puking on the wall of the venue, but we managed to scuttle away before they noticed. Cut to the show. It's full of nothing but underage, scantily clad, very intoxicated girls, so nothing unusual. The band performs. We stumble our way home. Cut to the next night. We are getting ready to go out. We buy some weed from Olive Driver and are on our way. The show goes off without a hitch, and we head home. Once at the hotel we make a holy rolly joint and head downstairs to smoke it. Within 2 minutes the cops literally come screeching into the hotel, as though it had been robbed. I drop the joint, crush it with my foot and we start walking away. After making lots of turns to throw them off, we notice a character behind us who's been making the same exact turns and seems to be following us. We decide to stop in a well-lit, busy-ish area to ward him off. He hesitates and then finally walks away. At this point I'm done with this city, and we head back to the hotel. We come to find that, since the hotel had a deposit of $150, the most I've ever seen for a hotel, and it wasn't a Four Seasons or anything, we have no money to check or bags on our flight until the next day, when the deposit is refunded, and the bags are not in any way carry-ons. Cut to us, still faked up, trying to find a Western Union to get money wired to us from our friend at home. After another 3 hours of looking we finally find one in a Walgreens, which proceeds to blast out my friend's banking info for all in the vicinity to hear. We head back to the hotel and sit outside, waiting for our lift to take us to the airport home. Looking back at it, it wasn't as bad as some of these stories, but it solidly convinced me that after not being able to find anything, because nothing in the city is permanent or updated on their maps, how we were treated by the citizens inhabiting the city, the fact we almost got mugged or rapped, the fact that we almost went to jail over half a joint, it has solidly convinced me that Minneapolis is a piece of unfriendly, angry piece of shit, and it honestly saddens me that Prince was such a big part of that city. Fact Minneapolis. Salt Lake City, Utah. We were driving through from Sacramento up to Idaho. Utah was our only stop overnight on the way. It was an Airbnb thing my sister-in-law had booked, which from the house was fine. There were some things that didn't look so great at first, like remodeling the lower half of the house, a broken window leading to said bottom part, and a bedroom with no walls that was clearly visible from the kitchen. Fine, I can live with those for a night, no big deal. We start to get dinner ready and look for plates. None. Okay, maybe in the dishwasher? Yep, but fully coated with food from previous tenants. Okay, that should have been taken care of before we got here. I tell everybody to stop and that we should check the bedding before we go any further. Beds have hair, crumbs of food, fresh stains. Yay, this wasn't done either. So we call up the property owner/manager and explain what we found. He adamantly refused what we said and told us everything was already clean. We told him to come visit then and show us his example of clean. He told us he'd be there in about an hour. So an hour or so passes and I expected him to drive up for having to take an hour to get there, right? Nope. Walks over from one house over through the backyard. Are you kidding me? He comes in, we introduce ourselves, show the beds with the dirty sheets still on the bed. Couldn't see anything. Okay. We show the dirty dishes and the dishwasher still not done. He said that that was a responsibility of the previous tenant to do. I was taken back and said that if the previous people didn't do it correctly, then it's your job to correct it. I'm sure there is a few or something you could have charged if those conditions weren't made. He got extremely aggressive and told us to leave the property and that he didn't have to deal with assholes like us. Sure, no problem, we need a complete refund before that happens. Not going to Salt Lake again. Pittsburgh. A novelty when I arrived as a freshman from South Florida. It wore off by Thanksgiving break. I'd thought the gritty, blue-collar atmosphere would be a welcome change from a place where people's wealth was sourced from ambiguous endeavors and the only thing manufactured were street drugs and mojo criollo, but I soon realized that the mills and supporting industry were all but gone, leaving vast tracts of vacant, overgrown land where industry once employed hundreds of thousands and drove a globally economy. Those formerly employed and their offspring now scrabbled for odd jobs while living off meager pensions, disability, or all-out welfare, stumbling about the city and its ragtag row houses and clapboard hovels in an urban hillbilly stupor, yelling at one another in the indigenous hunky lilt through toothless mouths only upturned into smiles when the local Iron City beer was afoot and or when the Bucks or Steelers were winning. The water, lead and chemical addled by decades of factory sputum leaching into the supply, was hardly scrubbed by local infrastructure, whose lead pipes contributed more than helped, poisoning the already poorly educated, if at all, minds that walked, wounded past shuttered storefronts like so many zombies in black and gold fanware. brown rivers, a heavy perpetual roadkill stench at optimum temperatures just between winter and spring, and the transition from fall, a thick humidity that, much like its inhabitants, can't escape the high wild Allegheny Valley. And darkened facades of buildings still wearing the city filth of industries gone by remain a backdrop for depression and underscore the need for any able healthy visitor to flee. But then, there are no direct flights from the so-called international airport, nor can one easily egress by car, despite the city's 500 or so bridges, as PennDOT habitually closes crumbling throughways at the most inopportune times, if not for never-ending repair, then to restrict a dwindling population from becoming even more so. Renaissance City? A term made up by almost a century's worth of Democratic politicos feeding the trades they once unionized positive fodder for their only jobs now are drinking heavily discounted beer in once thriving halls and chain smoking before succumbing to the inevitable black lung, asbestos inhaling, lead paint perpetuated mill poisoning from shifts ending long ago. If Cleveland is the mistake on the lake, Pittsburgh is the crumbling corrosion at the confluence.